Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into the world of caregiving.
Yeah.
It's a role, well, many of us will step into at some point. And right now, something like 1 in 3 adults in the U.S. are informal or family caregivers. That's according to the Mayo Clinic.
That's a huge number, a really widespread
It
experience.
really is.
And, while caregiving can be incredibly rewarding, bring real connection,
Hmm,
it's also really important to acknowledge the significant emotional and physical demands it places on people.
definitely.
It's often a path with challenges that, well, aren't always talked about openly.
Exactly. So whether you're listening and you're currently caring for someone, maybe a spouse, a child with specific needs,
Hmm.
an aging parent, a friend, or maybe you see this role coming up in your future.
Right.
This deep dive is really for you. We want to unpack caregiver stress, look at the complexities, and shine a light on the support that's out there.
And to do that, we've looked at a few key sources. We've got detailed info from the Mayo Clinic on understanding and managing caregiver stress itself. Then there's a fascinating research study from NCBI in the UK, looking specifically at the burden for caregivers of young adults with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and ADHD during that transition to adulthood.
That transition period is so critical.
It really is. And we also gathered a bunch of resources on support groups from places like the Autism Society of Texas, ANE, that's the Association for Autism and Neurodiversity Parents Helping Parents, and also CHADD, which focuses on virtual support for ADHD.
Great. So our mission here is pretty straightforward.
Mm.
Pull out the key insights about caregiver stress, what it is, its impact, practical strategies, resources, and we'll give a specific look at those experiences of caregivers supporting individuals with ASD and ADHD as they step into adulthood.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's get into it. According to the Mayo Clinic, how do they actually define a caregiver?
Well, they keep it quite broad, actually. A caregiver is basically anyone who helps another person in need.
Any kind of need.
Yeah, could be due to illness, disability, or just the changes that come with aging. It covers a whole range of relationships and support levels.
Okay. And it's not just anecdotal. They found caregivers report higher stress levels.
Yes, that's a key finding. Caregivers consistently report higher levels of stress than non-caregivers. When you think about the demands, it makes sense.
It does.
And the emotions involved, well, they can be tough.
Yeah.
Things like anger, frustration, just sheer weariness, sadness, even loneliness. It's a lot to juggle.
A relentless balancing act, like you said earlier.
Yeah, often leaves very little room for your own needs.
So speaking of those demands, the Mayo Clinic lists specific factors that can crank up the stress levels, right?
They do, yeah. It's a really useful list for you, the listener, to maybe see what resonates. Things like caring for a spouse that adds a whole different emotional layer, or living with the person you care for. That really blurs the boundaries.
Right, no escape sometimes.
Exactly. And the intensity, like needing constant round-the-clock care is incredibly draining.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then the feeling of being alone in it, or helpless, maybe even depressed, that must just compound everything.
Absolutely. Financial problems are a huge stressor too.
Yeah?
And just the sheer number of hours you put in, it can feel like a second job, but unpaid.
Totally.
And sometimes not getting clear guidance from doctors or professionals leaves you feeling lost.
Okay.
Then there's the feeling of having no choice, being thrust into the role. That can cause resentment.
Understandably.
Plus maybe feeling like you don't have the right coping skills or that constant pressure, the need to be on all the time. That really drives stress up.
That always on feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this stress, it shows up in specific ways. What are the signs Mayo Clinic says to watch out for?
Yeah, the signs are important warning flags. Feeling really burdened, worrying constantly, that's a big one.
Okay.
Frequent tiredness, even if you feel like you're sleeping okay. Or big changes in sleep way too much or way too little.
Physical things, too.
Definitely. Noticeable weight changes, up or down, without trying. Becoming much more irritable or angry than usual.
Right.
Losing interest in hobbies or activities you used to love.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling persistently sad.
What about, like, actual physical symptoms?
Yes, more frequent headaches, body aches, just generally feeling unwell more often. And concerningly, sometimes misusing alcohol or other substances.
Why?
And a really telling one, starting to miss your own doctor's appointments.
Oof. Yeah. That's a clear sign you're putting yourself last.
Yeah.
And the long-term risks, if this stress isn't managed, they're serious.
Very serious. Mayo Clinic is clear on this. Chronic, unmanaged caregiver stress increases the risk for depression, anxiety. It disrupts sleep, often leads to less physical activity, maybe poorer diet choices.
Right.
And all that together raises the risk of major health problems like heart disease and even diabetes down the road.
So managing this stress isn't just nice to have, it's essential for your own health and your ability to keep caring.
Absolutely crucial. Not a luxury, a necessity.
Okay. Let's shift focus slightly to that NCBI study you mentioned, the one looking at caregivers for adults with ASD and ADHD.
Yes, the UK study. It looks specifically at that transition period, adolescence into young adulthood, a really pivotal, often challenging time.
Right. And what did it find about the levels of burden? Was it similar for both groups?
Well, it found the burden was high in both groups, which fits with the general picture of caregiving stress.
Okay.
But, and this is key, the burden for those caring for individuals with ASD was significantly higher than for those caring for individuals with ADHD.
Wow, significantly higher. Did they compare it to other caregiving situations?
They did, and the comparisons are quite stark. For ASD caregivers, the burden level was similar to caregivers of people with acquired brain injuries.
That's intense.
It really highlights the level of support needed. And for ADHD caregivers, the burden was comparable to those caring for people with dementia.
Again, really demanding situations. So what factors did the study find were linked to this burden?
For both groups, a big one was how much support the caregiver felt the young adult needed. The higher the perceived need, the higher the caregiver's burden.
That makes sense. More need equals more strain.
Exactly. And that held true even when they controlled for other factors.
Were there differences between the ASD and ADHD groups in what drove the burden?
Yes, some important ones. For the ADHD group, the severity of the core ADHD symptoms like inattention, hyperactivity was a significant predictor. More severe symptoms, higher caregiver burden.
Okay.
But for the ASD group, it wasn't the core autism symptoms so much as co-occurring mental health issues.
Like anxiety or depression in the person with ASD.
Precisely. When the autistic individual also had psychiatric symptoms, the caregiver burden went up significantly. That wasn't the case in the ADHD group.
That's a really interesting distinction. So the type of challenge matters a lot. What about unmet needs? Did the study look at that?
Absolutely. Unmet needs, things the caregivers felt weren't being adequately addressed, were strongly linked to higher burden in both groups.
Which really highlights the importance of getting the right support in place.
Totally. It shows where the gaps are.
Were there specific unmet needs that were major drivers of stress for both?
Yes. Things related to depression or anxiety in the young adult, concerns about their risk of being exploited,
Oh, wow.
difficulties managing inappropriate behavior, and dealing with aggression or violence. These came up as significant stressors for both sets of caregivers.
Those are incredibly tough situations.
Extremely challenging.
Were there unmet needs more specific to the ASD group's burden?
Yes. For caregivers of autistic adults, unmet needs around social relationships, broader mental health problems, safety concerns for the individual, communication challenges, and finding appropriate things for them to do during the day, like suitable activities or work, these were all significantly tied to higher burden.
That really paints a picture of the complex support needed as autistic individuals move into adulthood.
It does. It shows the breadth of challenges.
And the study suggested that if we could address these specific unmet needs,
It could potentially reduce that caregiver burden. That was a key takeaway. Targeting interventions to these specific areas could make a real difference.
okay, so that study really drives home the unique pressures, especially during that transition phase for ASD and ADHD families. I'll pivot back to solutions now. What practical advice does the Mayo Clinic offer for managing stress more generally?
They have some really good practical stuff. A huge one is learning to ask for and actually accept help.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, definitely. Caregivers are so used to giving help, they suggest making a list of actual tasks people could do, like take your loved one for a walk, bring over a meal, drive them to an appointment.
Makes it concrete.
Exactly. People can then choose something they can genuinely manage. It makes asking and receiving help less awkward.
That's a great tip. What else?
Focusing on what you can do, not beating yourself up for not being perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect caregiver.
Good reminder. Self-compassion.
Yes. And setting realistic goals. Break big tasks down. Learn to say no sometimes to things that will just drain you more. Protect your energy.
Saying no is a skill in itself.
It really is. And crucial for caregivers. They also stress connecting with community resources.
Like what kind of resources?
Classes on caregiving skills, maybe? Or practical services like transport, meal delivery, help with cleaning, things that free up your time and energy.
Makes sense. And support groups.
Yeah.
Always hear those recommended?
Strongly recommended by Mayo Clinic. That shared understanding, connecting with people who get it because they're living it too.
Yeah.
That's invaluable.
Reduces that isolation feeling.
Hugely. It provides emotional support, practical tips from peers, and just that sense of community. You're not alone.
What about just, friends and family, informal support?
Also vital. Staying connected with supportive friends and family, making time, even just for a quick call or coffee with people who lift you up, that helps combat the loneliness.
Right. And then there's the really basic self-care stuff.
The absolute foundation. Prioritizing sleep, which is so often disrupted. Finding ways to improve sleep quality.
Easier said than done, but important.
Crucial. Getting some physical activity most days, eating a healthy diet, drinking enough water. The basics really matter for stress management.
They're the first things to go when you're overwhelmed, aren't they?
Often, yes. Which is why you have to be intentional. And also, seeing your own doctor.
Ah, yes. You mentioned that earlier.
Keep up with your own checkups, vaccinations, screenings, and tell your doctor you're a caregiver. Discuss your worries, any symptoms. They need that context.
Good point. And what about getting actual breaks? Respite care.
Yes. Respite care is so important for preventing burnout. It's basically getting temporary relief.
How does that work?
Could be in-home, help someone comes to your house for a few hours, or adult day centers, they provide activities in a community setting, or even short-term stays in nursing homes or assisted living for longer breaks. It gives you a chance to recharge.
Sounds essential. And for caregivers who are also working paid jobs.
They should look into the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA. Eligible employees might be able to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave per year for caregiving. Worth checking with HR about options.
Good to know those protections might be there. So, Mayo Clinic says don't go it alone, reach out. Where do people start looking for these local resources?
They suggest the National Elder Care Locator as a starting point, or your local area agency on aging, or State Aging and Disability Resource Center. You can usually find these online or in the phone book.
Okay.
And don't forget, mobile apps and websites. There are more and more tools popping up specifically designed to support caregivers.
Lots of avenues for general support then. Let's get specific again. Finding support for caregivers of adults with ASD and ADHD. Let's talk about those organizations. Autism Society of Texas.
Right. They offer a really great mix of online and regional connection groups. Online, they use Facebook, email lists, Meetup, plus virtual and face-to-face options.
What are the groups for?
For autistic individuals themselves, parents, caregivers, even professionals, it's a space to share info, experiences, build connections.
Nice and inclusive. Any specific virtual groups stand out?
Yeah, they have statewide virtual groups like a general parent connections meeting, one in Spanish, Grupo de Apoyo para Padres y Cuidadores, a group for parents of those with level 3 support needs,
Okay.
and one called Thrive Community, specifically for families of autistic adults 18 and over, plus groups for autistic adults themselves.
Good to see that focus on the adult stage. What about within Texas, regionally?
They have regional groups too, both in person and virtual, in cities like Houston, Austin, Dallas, San Antonio. Helps build local connections, find local resources, sometimes specific groups too, like for girls or parents.
So plenty of options there depending on preference.
Yeah.
What about an AN Association for Autism and Neurodiversity?
AN also has a strong online presence. They run discussion forums on Google Groups, moderated by staff.
For who specifically?
Different relationships, parents of autistic adults post-high school, parents of kids, parents of teens, partners of autistic adults, even ex-partners.
Wow, that covers a lot of different perspectives.
It really does. And then they have more structured, facilitated online support groups.
How are those structured?
They're categorized by who's in the group: autistic adults, teens, parents of adults, parents of kids, teens, neurodiverse couples, other family members like grandparents, usually run by experienced facilitators.
Are they accessible, cost-wise?
Yes, that's important. They offer financial assistance for all their groups to make sure people can access them.
That's fantastic. Okay, next, Parents Helping Parents. They focus more broadly on developmental disabilities.
Yes, though based in California, they support a wider community. They have a specific Parents of Adults with Developmental Disabilities support group.
How does that one work?
Meets monthly, and they also have a private Facebook group and email list for ongoing connection. They welcome parents, adult siblings, other caregivers. It's about shared experience.
Another great resource.
Mhm.
And finally, CHAD, focusing on ADHD. What virtual support do they offer?
CHADD provides various virtual support groups for adults with ADHD. These are generally a benefit for members of ADA, the Attention Deficit Disorder Association, which is affiliated with CHADD.
Okay. And what kinds of groups do they have? It seems like ADHD affects people in diverse ways.
It really does, and their groups reflect that. They have groups for women 50 and over non-ADHD partners,
Hmm.
a group on money matters for adults with ADHD, one called Radical ADHD Women, one for the African American Black diaspora community and ADHD.
Wow, really specific.
Yeah, and one for men, Men Becoming Our Best. Also groups for newly diagnosed adults, couples, gifted adults with ADHD, job seekers, young adults, LGBTQ+ individuals with ADHD. It's a very comprehensive list.
Incredibly comprehensive. It really shows an understanding of the different intersections of life in ADHD.
Definitely.
So it's clear there are many places to turn, whether for general caregiver stress or more specific support related to ASD or ADHD. Now, before we wrap up, there was one more interesting point from the sources, the overlap between autism and ADHD in adults.
Yes, the British Journal of General Practice article highlighted this. It's really important, the significant co-occurrence.
Yes.
Well, they cited research suggesting maybe as high as 41% of autistic individuals might also have ADHD symptoms.
That's a lot. Why is recognizing that co-occurrence so important?
Because ADHD symptoms, trouble with attention, concentration, executive function, can actually make the social difficulties and anxiety common in autism worse.
Oh, so they compound each other.
Exactly. And that combination can really impact self-esteem and mood.
Okay.
But the crucial thing is ADHD often has effective treatments, particularly medication. So identifying and treating co-occurring ADHD in autistic adults could really improve their quality of life.
That's a really positive point, that recognition can lead to effective help.
Yes. And the article mentioned there's a simple screening tool available too.
Oh, yeah.
The WHO's Adult ADHD Self-Report Scale, the ASRS. It's free, relatively easy to use, and can help flag potential ADHD that needs further assessment.
So worth considering and screening for in autistic adults. A valuable reminder about the complexity of support needs.
Yep.
Well, as we finish this deep dive, it's crystal clear. Caregiving is demanding. Hugely rewarding sometimes, but demanding. And managing that stress isn't optional, is it?
Not at all. It's essential for your own well-being and for your ability to keep providing that care effectively and with compassion.
And the big takeaway for you, the listener, has to be, you are not alone in this.
Absolutely not. We've talked about so many resources today: general stress management strategies, specific support groups for ASD, ADHD, other developmental disabilities.
Right.
These communities offer understanding, practical advice, and just that vital connection with others who get it.
So as you go about your week, maybe just think about this.
Mhm.
What's one small step, just one, you could take to prioritize your own well-being?
Yeah, maybe it's finally looking up one of those support groups.
Or identifying just one task someone else could genuinely help you with this week.
Or even just scheduling 10 extra minutes for yourself. For
Hmm.
quiet, for a walk, for something you enjoy.
Because ultimately, the strength to care for others really does start with taking care of yourself.